How you doing?
Pretty good, pretty good.
Got a busy
Uh,
day on your hands?
yeah, a little bit, but not too shabby.
You just said in your
Can't
message that
complain.
you're doing 8 hours of recording today.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna be doing this pretty much all night.
So what
I'm gonna
what
have to.
what will that all is that all for Cryptoconomy, or are you doing other stuff as well?
I'll probably today's episode I can probably wrap up in like 2.5, maybe 3 hours. But I'm doing a audiobook. The Have you seen the Little Bitcoin book?
Uh, yes.
Just
Yep.
came out.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, I'm doing the audiobook for that. And I'm also working on one that will be part of the show, but it's a pretty lengthy piece, and I've been needing to uh, basically space it out over 5 or 6 days to actually get it done.
That's wild, man.
Yeah.
So Cryptoconomy and related activities is full time for you?
Oh yeah, it's I ain't got time for anything else.
It's funny, man. I've been doing this kind of stuff as a hobby for a long time, and I heard a few other podcasters talk about it recently. But it's if you're just listening, you're like, oh, sweet, another conversation between people that I'm people that on subject matter that I'm interested in having a conversation. But and
uh,
I don't. It's not a complaint at all because I love it. But there is so much work that goes on behind the scenes just to put out those episodes on a daily or weekly basis.
oh yeah, I don't know. Like I love it, like to some extent, because like I know it's kind of what I would do with my time anyway. Like I find myself even when I'm like, all right, I'm gonna take a break for a minute, like I'll go and like try to watch something on Netflix or whatever, and it's like not that great a show. Or like I try to go dabble in something else, and then I find myself just sitting down and be like, let me read Nick Carter's new article. Like, like I'm doing the same shit anyway, and so I end up spending my time doing that anyway.
It's
So
so funny, man. I mean, we'll break into the behavior change component of Bitcoin that is, I mean, I've been talking about a ton lately, and it's permeating the culture. But it's funny. I have the same thing. I'll sit down with my girl and we'll try to find something on Netflix, and I'll be flipping through for like 20 minutes because I'm like, there's just nothing here that's really pulling me. And ultimately, I'd be like, I'd really rather spend the time reading an article or enhancing my knowledge in some area
yeah.
of this whole thing. And
I still
that's an
haven't
amazing thing.
finished Sovereign Individual. You want to sit down and read it? Yeah.
Well, yeah, that's the other thing, right? Like anything that can be mutually shared, you're trying to like, why don't we listen? Why don't we watch this? Why don't I put on this YouTube video of a how-to for Wasabi Wallet? That would be interesting, wouldn't it?
And my wife's like, "What? What?
Yeah. Oh, it's my,
No."
my my girlfriend's like, yeah, no. Why don't we just watch a movie instead? And I'm like, all right, fine.
That's funny.
Yeah, but man, before we get going, or before we go further, I just want to let you know I spoke with their Gigi. I don't know how he likes to be called, but I had
Yeah.
did a chat with him a week or two ago, and in preparation for that, I listened to the interview you did with he and Brandon, and
Oh, okay.
I'll
Yeah,
be
yeah.
I'll be speaking with Brandon at the end of the month. Really looking forward to that because we're both kind of mycophiles and obviously super interested in Bitcoin. So
Hmm.
should make for an interesting discussion. But that's how I got my first introduction to you. And I haven't been to this year was kind of my first. I've been into Bitcoin for a long time, but it was
Hmm.
kind of on the shelf back in my mind, kind of running in the background. And so I hadn't really gotten into the Bitcoin podcast universe up until this year. And
Yeah.
there's no disrespect intended, but I like yours wasn't one of the first that popped up when I started going down that rabbit hole.
Oh no,
And
that's fine. I'm still like way in. I'm surprised how much I'm actually popping up now because I've been like this little niche corner for a long time, and it feels like I'm actually breaking out of that, which is
well,
actually really exciting.
I bet it is, man, and I want to talk about that too. But that's actually the point I want to get to. I've listened to pretty much all of them, some more than others, and I listened to the one with yourself and Brandon and Gigi, and honestly, man, I was blown away. Like I thought that I just I thought you did it better than anybody else that I'd come across, just in terms of delivery,
Really?
in terms of in terms of your knowledge on the subject and the way you can infuse a conversation with that knowledge, but also extract it from the guest. I mean, I was blown away, and so subsequent to that, I downloaded a bunch of your episodes and have been listening to them in preparation for this, and just because they're so great. And even tonight, while we were at the grocery store, in fact, I had my earbuds in and I was listening. It's so funny you can consume content that way these days. But
No, I know. It's so awesome.
I was listening to the dictation, or however you call them. You were reading
Mhm.
Gigi's most recent article. I think, was it on the sovereign individual? Is that it?
Yes. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
The rise of the sovereign
right.
individual.
That's right.
Yeah.
And so that was fucking awesome. I mean, and then your
Thank you.
and
Thank
then
you.
your commentary afterwards. You know, you were so kind of wrapped up in it, and I was
Yeah.
totally with you the whole way. And then at the end, you were like, "Ooh, I really got worked up on that one." I just laughed out loud because I thought it was so great. So I just wanted to give you a kudos on the work that you're putting in. I think you're doing a spectacular job, and like you said, now it seems like you're starting to get more awareness and recognition and stuff, and I think that's awesome, man. So just keep it up.
That's fantastic, dude. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And it's hard to get like I know like I'll see numbers of like people listening to the show, but for so much of the time, and there's been this recent explosion in the last literally like the week. I've gone like 300, 400 followers. And like people are actually giving feedback. It's like, oh yeah, I like the crypto economy. It's like, oh, you guys are out there, because it's been just numbers in front. Like I said, I'll spend 8 hours just sitting in front of my computer, and it's just me talking to my screen.
Yeah.
So like I forget that like other people are actually out there listening. So it's really awesome
Well,
to hear your response to it.
yeah, man, and I'm super excited for you to do more. I love that your format is obviously is different, but it's so hugely valuable because there is so much great content, written content coming out now by all these great thinkers in the space. And when they come out, they get spread like wildfire on Twitter. But people are busy, and you don't always have time
Hmm.
to read every single one. And you converting it into a medium that's more passively consumable is just a tremendous value to the content and to the industry. So yeah, man, I think you're probably gonna keep blowing up.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I appreciate it.
And the last question about that, and I'll stop, pumping. I'll stop pumping you up after that. But do you like? Did you ever do formal voiceover work or anything like that?
No, this is my first foray into that. What's funny is this really actually started because I've been reading stuff to my wife out loud. Like we'll read books together, and like I would sit down and read it out loud, and I'd do the voices and do all that stuff, and she would just love it, and it would
That's
allow
awesome.
her to like just like I'm gonna clean the room right now and listen to my book. And like we would read a book together, read like The Name of the Wind, the Mistborn series, couple of nonfiction things, but she likes the fantasy stuff with me. Um, and
She likes the romantic stuff with you.
yeah. um, but yeah, so it kind of started from that, and something that stuck in my mind was when we hired somebody that was really really great for our wedding. Like he wasn't like a DJ, he was kind of a organized people, like let's build an environment. And like it wasn't like somebody who was just like picking music. Like he literally, like we kind of took from him to be like our wedding planner, and we had like a party. We had a fantastic time because he was great at knowing when to let the crowd sit down for a minute, how to build them up over like 40 minutes with a song for the 70s to 80s crew, the 90s. I mean, like he broke it down to a science of getting people worked up into a damn good time.
Man, you got to
And I
name you got to
loved it.
name drop this guy. Give him some love.
It's Fox. His oh Jesus.
Put it in the
I'll
show.
look
I'll put
up
it in
if
the
you're
show notes.
actually
Show
curious.
notes.
Yeah, yeah. If you're actually curious, I'll find his information because he's amazing. Um, but we ended up chatting back and forth. We just ended up bullshitting for like 2 hours. And he randomly told me, he's like, dude, you've got a great radio voice, because he did a radio show. And I was like, really? And we kind of talked back and forth about that. And I don't know, that always stuck with me, that like maybe I could do a podcast, like maybe. And that like kind of, I guess you could say, festered. Like it grew and like slowly spread into my mind for like 6 years in Bitcoin. Like, you should do a podcast. You should do a podcast, guy. Come on, let's do a podcast. And then finally I broke down like a year and a half ago and I was like, I'm just gonna start it. I'm
That's
just gonna do
awesome,
it.
man. Well, I
Yeah.
mean, my dad used to tell me I had a great face for radio, so that's the most encouragement I ever got.
Oh,
But
that's awesome.
no, but you sound like you're a professional, man. Like you sound like a
Wow.
hey, man.
Hey, let's try this again. So I learned something. It literally cannot be a more beautiful day outside. There's no breeze, there's no nothing, and the power just blinked off for like a good solid second and a half, and then came right back.
And just shut everything
And
down.
I shut everything down. It didn't actually shut down my computer, and I was wondering if, because my monitor is not on my battery backup, and so I was like, wait a second, I wonder if he can actually still hear me. And but then I realized that this actually makes me realize I need to change my setup a little bit in the media closet that I've got, because my router is not on my battery backup. So my internet went, even though my computer was still live, and then I had to reset my computer. And I think it may be some sort of power surge, but I think my HDMI switch just went out. I was trying to get it back up, and I couldn't even get my computer back up on my monitor. I have a switch so that I can switch between my main like Bitcoin node computer, my Casa node, and then like my main this computer, and nothing was coming up. So I had to take it out of my switch and put it right in the back of my computer.
Weird.
I hope I didn't lose my HDMI switch. Doesn't make any sense, but
Strange. Yeah,
whatever.
it was one of those
Yeah.
situations where I went on talking for like 20 seconds and then I was like, hello? Anybody there? All right, so we'll get back on track, but why don't we start? You know, there's I don't know where to start, but why don't we just start with, and we don't have a tremendous amount of time, but just kind of your story, how you became aware of, became involved in Bitcoin.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Are we recording right now?
Yep.
Okay. Sweet. Uh, so I've been in Bitcoin for, I don't know, 8 years now.
Wow.
I think that's right. I keep saying 8 years. Um, uh, and so sometime in like early 2011 ish, and it was during the bubble. It was crazy, like right when I got in, because my brother majored in economics, so he was at school at the time, in school at the time, and he would come home, and I was kind of in like this spot in my life where I was trying to figure out what the heck I wanted to do. I was doing like, I've always loved film. That was actually like my first love at the time, and I was doing a film business and doing like wedding videos. That's the only like consistent work, and then little commercials and like side gigs and stuff like that. But it was just kind of like a casual like get by thing. And I found so much of my time was just my brother and I debating Austrian economics.
Really?
We were kind of going down that, yeah, and
That's awesome.
I was going down that rabbit hole, and like kind of discovering like the idea of like the liberty philosophy and stuff in a way I had not been exposed to it before. And Austrian economics just made so much sense to us as we finally started to stumble upon it. And so it's like, wait, what is the Federal Reserve exactly? And he would just come back from his economics class where he just learned nothing but Keynesian, Keynesian, Keynesian. And you'd be like, this doesn't make any sense. And he would be arguing with his professors. He's like, what you taught us last week does not line up with what we learned today. Like both of those things can't exist at the same time. And they'd be like, that's what the book says. And like they would go back and forth. And then we'd come home and just debate back and forth about it for hours. And then finally one night randomly he was like chatting with some like hacker, like 4chan-ish, like kind of dark web friend on the internet. And the guy was like, you'd probably be interested in this thing called Bitcoin. And Jeffrey was like, what the hell was that? And then he came home and was all excited to tell me about it. And that night it was like a light switch. Like had really been discussing for like the weeks leading up to that, kind of the liberating power of the internet, Austrian economic theory, And I've always been like a big tech nerd. So it was like this trifecta of like leading me all the way to Bitcoin from everything that I had been doing at the time. And we were down the rabbit hole that night. We didn't, I remember like just kind of laughing because we like read the white paper. We were just absolutely like engrossed from the first moment. And it was 9 o'clock the next morning and the sun was up and we were like, holy crap, we got to go to bed. We had just Bitcoin nosedive down the rabbit hole the very first night. And it was during that early bubble where it went from uh, like $1 to $33. And it did it in like 2 weeks or something like that, 2 or 3 weeks. It was so fast. And I proceeded to make my first investment ever. Like this was my foray into, I'm gonna buy a long-term investment. This is gonna be great. I'm gonna be an investor. And I bought Bitcoin at the absolute tippity top of the FOMO peak, and then proceeded to watch all of my money bleed for like months and months until it was practically non-existent. And I had to basically stop and like realize to myself that I didn't know what I had invested in. Like I had this vague idea of what Bitcoin was, and it sounded really cool on the surface. It sounded really powerful and like a fascinating technology, but I didn't really know. It was just like that utopian idea of a decentralized currency, and I just started reading. I was like, all right, I'm either going to sell out and just claim that I've made the dumbest mistake of my entire life, or I'm going to know. I'm going to know that either I made a mistake, or I'm going to know that this is just early. This was a hype cycle, and this is a real technology that's going to make a difference. And I started reading and being like, I'm going to be able to explain this to anyone, and I haven't stopped reading since. Like the more I learned about it, the more I was like, no, I'm just early. This thing is incredible, and it makes perfect sense. I couldn't figure out a way to kill it. Like the more and more I read about it, and then 6 years later, after debating with myself to start a podcast for, I don't know, it seemed like the whole time. I finally just broke down one day, and I was like, "What? There couldn't be anything easier than, uh, uh, like, I wanted the audio for all of the articles out there,
Right.
because, like I said, I've been reading for months and months and months. I'm like, man, I could read so many more of these if I just had these all in audio, and waited really for like years, being like, somebody's got to do this. Somebody's got to do this. And I just sat down on my bed one day, talking into my iPhone, just holding my iPhone up to my face, and reading it on my wife's iPad. And that was the first episode. And then I just didn't stop.
Oh
And that was like
man,
a year and a half ago. Yeah.
that is so sick. I have a bunch of questions. Okay, so because one of the things that I'm intrigued by, because I was aware of Bitcoin because I remember when it reached parity with the U.S. dollar, and there was a bunch of kerfuffle about that.
Yeah.
Um, and sounds like in a very similar situation. Like the Federal Reserve, the current monetary system is a bunch of crooks, and it doesn't make any sense, and we need to go back to something. And I was into gold and silver, that whole shtick.
Oh, yeah.
And I mean, there's probably many reasons why we initially look past Bitcoin. For me, it was probably one, and my own insecurity about my non-techiness, which prohibited me from not diving further into the tech and thinking I won't be able to understand it anyways. So
Yeah. Yeah.
that's part of it. Then the other part is thinking, well, something so small and nascent could never challenge such a gargantuan system, or could never be a better counter to that gargantuan system than something like gold, because it's just so small and tiny. And I guess I
Mhm.
lacked the foresight to be able to say, like, well, if it can survive and if it cannot be stopped and people continue to see it playing such a role, then over time it will grow and grow and grow. That was just I didn't wasn't looking at it in that way. And so as a result,
Mhm.
I had to, and I was intellectually curious about it. That's the thing. And I think And I started interviewing people around it in 2015.
Uh-huh.
And I think my issue was,
Oh, wow, 2015?
yeah, yeah,
Oh,
like
wow.
just as a hobby. This podcast was
Mm-hmm.
started this month, but was interviewing. I was living in Shanghai, and Bobby Lee lived there, so I interviewed him at first. And then whenever I had the
Awesome.
opportunity to connect with people, I was just so intellectually interested in it. But for some reason, I was like interested in it like a journalist rather than someone who's going to act on the interest, which I hate because
Uh-huh.
that's not how I've approached anything in the past.
Yeah.
Anyways, my long-winded question here is, I get that you guys were having these debates and then it popped up and you got into it. But what made you think that it was unique? Like, what made you think that this wasn't just internet funny money that someone dreamt up and it's, that you'd have any degree of long-term thinking around its survival and the potential for an investment?
The economics, and I was a combination of economics, and then I was there at the beginning of BitTorrent. And like the combination of those things, the fact that uh, what Bitcoin was as a money was essentially an Austrian economic theory, excuse me, experiment. It was, how do we codify like the Austrian theory of sound money and then make it in a distributed fashion? How do we make it like BitTorrent? And I saw, I would see like them trying to shut down the Pirate Bay and like all the fights and stuff. Like I followed the BitTorrent stuff very closely because that was another like thing that just fascinated me as a technology. And Bitcoin was like the perfect marriage of those two things. And those were the first two things that like just made me go like, wow, this is actually really powerful. That incentive structure, like in reading the white paper of like the miners keep it secure, the everybody running the software is checking the accounting, like it is basically a fully auditing the system. It was like I was like, this is straight up a distributed Federal Reserve. And I just thought the concept was fascinating. And I always felt like the internet had to eventually, like when I looked at the grand picture of the internet as it disrupted each of these huge industries and just flipped what we thought of as the norm, and these 70-year-old, 100-year-old companies would just be like, oh, poof. And they'd be gone, and they're no longer the dominant in their field. They're no longer the dominant publisher. They're no longer the dominant media production companies. Like I was watching this huge transition of the internet and this digital age. In fact, I just did a Guys Take episode kind of about that whole concept.
Yeah, I
And
listened to it. The eight
Oh,
steps.
did you? Yeah, the seven
Seven.
like
Yeah.
disruptions of
Sorry.
the
Yeah.
digital age. Yeah.
Yeah. It was great.
And then like Bitcoin just fits so beautifully into that that idea that I had just been kind of slowly building in my head that seemed to be the natural progression of things.
Right.
And it was like, even if it's not Bitcoin specifically, like I was realizing that I was waiting for something like that. Like that just seemed to be the next piece of the puzzle to really to be that next shift in like the kind of digital era, I
Right.
guess you could say.
And so when you invested and then it crashed, did you panic sell or did you hold strong, hodl strong?
I explained to I committed to myself that I wouldn't make a decision because I got in out of ignorance and just FOMO and just the vague idea of it. I decided that I wasn't going to get out. I wasn't going to sell unless I knew every piece of it, unless I knew it so thoroughly that I could explain to you why it wasn't going to work. And so I never got to that point.
Nice.
So I still have, I think I still have coins actually from those days, if I'm not mistaken.
Cool.
But I basically held well. I've had some sad disasters along the way, but uh, but I did not sell. No.
Okay. So that happened then, and a year and a half ago got into the podcast and started
Hmm.
making this your full-time thing. What were the intervening years like? You because presumably if you got it that early, you recognized the problem, you saw Bitcoin as the solution to that problem. I mean, it must have been incredibly exciting, incredibly like
Oh yeah.
incredibly hopeful, all the things that many, many people are feeling now. But, first of all, there wasn't near as much mainstream or whatever you want to call the current attention that's on Bitcoin. So kind of like, what was it like kind of having seen the light or knowing the secret prior to many other people knowing it? And how did you kind of, what was your approach to life, and how did it evolve over the intervening years?
Well, it was a lot of excitement early on, just in the idea that like I felt like I had found this kind of diamond in the rough sort of thing. But it also felt very unreal. It felt like this dream that I hoped would happen, but it was not a part of anyone's reality. Like I couldn't say the word Bitcoin, and I mean no one would have any idea. I remember actually the first time Reddit blew up about there being a news report that mentioned Bitcoin as a thing, and there was the because it was, I think it was Gawker, if I'm not mistaken. I can't remember exactly who, but there was the big piece on the Silk Road. That was right around the time that I found it, and that was like one of the first times that it was ever really mentioned in, I guess you could say, the mainstream. And uh, so like it was just the biggest news ever that someone even spoke about it somewhere in the mainstream. And I remember I was telling people about it, and people like my friends and stuff. And I'm trying to come to terms with like, okay, they're just going to think this is stupid magic internet points, and like I need to be very reserved about the way I talk about it, like, or I'm gonna sound like a absolute psycho. And so I was trying to ease all my friends into the idea and stuff, but then every once in a while, one of them would be like, I heard about that Bitcoin thing. Is that what it was that you were telling me about? I so heard that about that on the news or something the other day, and I was like, yes, it's spreading. And it was really surreal to because the space was tiny. Like you could know everyone in Bitcoin back then. Like it was a Reddit community of like, I don't know, like I guess the subreddit maybe had like 10,000 people in it at the time. I can't remember, but it just felt tiny.
Yeah.
Felt like this little corner of the world that nobody knew about. And it was just crazy to slowly see it seep out into the mainstream until one day I was just like, yeah, CNBC talks about it like every day. And it was like, oh, holy crap. Like, how far have we come from that point? It was like such a gradual transition. And obviously, those big hype cycles made a huge difference. But there were so many little moments like that where it was like, you would just see it somewhere and it's like, that's right. Bitcoin is real. It actually exists in the real world and people are
I'm
hearing about
not
it and finding
crazy.
out about it. I'm not crazy. I'm not
And
crazy.
and what was it like to go through each of those respective hype cycles? Both the crazy run ups where you're realizing all the things you tend to realize when you hold a rapidly appreciating asset, and then the steep fall offs, and then having seen a couple of them begin to understand, like, oh, this is how this thing is growing. How has
Yeah.
your perspective on those elements of it changed?
I remember particularly in the second major bubble, because, well, really the second one, the 2013 one, kind of happened in two stages.
Right.
So we had like kind of a mini bear market there for a little while before that second huge run. Excuse me. And the 2014, 15, and 16, like that bear market. 2016 wasn't really a bear market, but it was mostly flat and sideways. And towards until the end of the year when we started to grow, that was rough. That was really rough. In fact, because there was more money on the line, essentially, and every time the hype cycle happened, I got caught up in it. Like I was like, "This is it, hyper Bitcoinization. We're
Right.
taking over the world tomorrow morning," and uh, and then the crash would happen, and then I would slowly be like, "Okay, okay, yeah, like we're way too early. What am I talking about? Everybody's
Yeah.
still using the core wallet. Like nobody's gonna use this thing yet." Um, Realizing that just so much more development had to happen. I'm trying to temper myself. This one was way easier. The 2017 collapse was just like, okay, This is business as usual. You know,
Right.
we're four crashes into this, and the bloodiest one was definitely the first one. I thought I had lost everything.
Right.
Um, and I've had a couple of scares of thinking I deleted keys. So my, I guess you could say, my skin has thickened quite a bit in
Right.
the realm of like all these price swings and problems with transactions or anything, any kind of issue or whatever. It's just like, okay, I've been here before.
Right.
Take a breather.
And I'm
We'll get it
sure
sorted out.
I'm sure also the fact that, being someone, the more hype cycles you survive, not just do you get used to the emotional jostling of that, but
Hmm.
also the lows coming off the highs are much higher than the previous lows, right? So if you were
Yes,
in like
yes,
two or three
yes.
hype cycles before, you're like, "Oh, I'm so sad. It's down at $3,000. This is so terrible." You
Yeah,
know?
pretty much, pretty much.
Do you try to, having had that kind of perspective, do you try to trade at all?
Um, sort of with a tiny amount. Like I try to. I mostly do it just for fun. Like I think of it as gambling. I did try to play the 2017 altcoin casinos, and I mostly got punished for it,
Right.
and then felt really, really stupid afterward. Particularly when like I knew. I remember my biggest problem was I was trying to buy on fundamentals when it came to altcoins, like some project that I actually thought was interesting instead of the hype, when I kind of knew in the back of my mind that it didn't make any sense to try to make a competitor. Like I knew the Austrian theory and the idea of money's 10 to 1, but I just wanted to be like, maybe there's a use for blockchain. Like
Right.
maybe somebody's going to figure something out. So I'll do the ones where the people seem serious, but those were the ones with no marketing. So I bought like the crappiest in the terms of like the gambling aspect of it. Um, and so, I feel like everybody got caught up in that.
For sure,
Uh,
man. This one of my
yeah.
one of the questions I ask in the rapid fire portion of this podcast is, have you ever bought altcoins and will you do so again in the future? And one of the reasons why I do that is because, everyone feels dumb for having gotten caught up in that, but it's a special individual who's not going to try to chase a like 100x in a month sort of return, right? Like you got to be really special to not put even just a little tiny bit in that to play the game. So I
Yep.
wouldn't beat yourself up too much because everyone I've had on thus far, their answer has been yes. Even the hardest
Yeah.
core Bitcoiners that they got caught up in it. So it's just one of those things. But you are right on that point you mentioned, or at least I think you are, in that you know all these projects and coins are emerging, and they're saying like we do faster transactions, we have better privacy, or we have this and that. And my thinking now is always just, yeah, but what are you transacting? The thing is that you have
Hmm.
to be established as money first before it matters if it's fast, if it's private, if it's anything. And if you don't have that as a foundation, then who gives a shit if you can do a 10,000 transactions a second? Because what you're transacting is nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. 10,000 transactions per second of something that can't hold value.
Right,
It's
exactly.
like,
So,
great.
so Bitcoin may not be perfect, but that's the process of the evolution, focusing on the most important attributes first, and then as time goes on and as those attributes become solidified, working on making it, better in other categories. But you can't just hop to that other category and be like, well, we can make something go 10 times faster or 10 times more private. It's like, well, yeah, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah. And there's actually Parker Lewis has a great article on this that was actually very recent. The Bitcoin Can't Be Copied. It's in his Gradually Then Suddenly series. And he makes a couple of great points. And I kind of ranted about it for like 30 minutes afterward. Um, on
I love your
like,
rants, by the way.
because thank you. Because it is a token that's specific to like that network. It is one that is only there for exchange. And like you said, like it's all about like how many transactions per second we can get. It's like, again, but what are you trying to exchange? Because it's purely digital and it cannot have another utility, it must compete with Bitcoin as money. And it doesn't matter if you call it a utility token or a smart contract platform, the token itself to hold value must compete as money with Bitcoin. And Bitcoin's attributes in money are not simply part of its code. It's a growing process. It's a maturation process where, like when Satoshi and Hal were running the client, it was not secure, decentralized money. There were two clients. They could have easily completely changed the rules. There was no security in the 21 million limit. It had to develop over time with, bugs that got fixed, with extending into all these other jurisdictions, thousands and thousands of nodes, the conflict between multiple clients and developers, so that it was obvious that hard forks simply weren't going to happen because it wasn't part of how the ecosystem developed. I gave an analogy that, like, money, it has a specific role and it solves a specific problem in society. It's the double coincidence of wants and the ability to get saleability or carry value across multiple spaces, across time from today to a year from now, and then across scales, so that I can use it in tiny fractions and use it in like huge amounts, and it's still the same good. It's worth the relative amount based on its scale. And because of that, it has to be decentralized and it has to be independent, which means that the code is just the instructions. It's like the DNA of a person. And like, so if our goal is to get a person, is to have a human being who can cut down a tree for us, if that's our utility that we're trying to get to, you might have the exact same instructions in a full-grown man who has an axe and then a baby who is still in the womb. But the full-grown man is the only one that can cut down the tree for us. Like, the other one is competing with the full-grown man for the same job. It's not just a network effect. It actually develops as money through a very long process. So trying to copy the code base and create an alternative money is the equivalent of being like, my guy is going to cut down the tree way faster than you, and here he is in the womb. Don't you want to get him to cut down the tree for you?
Right.
And it's just, there's so many different aspects to it, but that's one that I kind of think illustrates one of the major issues, is that money is really a maturation process, and particularly with the network and gaining independence and security.
Yeah, I agree. And, there's always lots of talk about, issuing new tokens and the process of doing that, and pre-mine and, whatever. And, it brings to mind the quote by, was it Hayek, who said, the only solution is going to come about in some sort of a sly, roundabout way? Was that Hayek?
I'm pretty sure that was Hayek. Yeah.
So, it would have been, that was so prescient and, just brilliant.
Oh, I know.
And it just adds to the Bitcoin lore because it's absolutely perfect. The only cherry on the top of that would be if he said, but it will only happen once. Because once that sly roundabout way is done once, it's no longer going to be sly and roundabout. So that can't happen again now, because it'll be gamed and co-opted and all the rest of it right from the get.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one thing about like Bitcoin there was no price for Bitcoin. Like you can't copy Bitcoin today and get the same sort of distribution.
Not possible.
I guess it's independence might not be the word, but the lack of conflict of interest in the people who were developing, and like Satoshi Hal, like everybody early on that was in Bitcoin, again, it was, the price was zero for like a year and a half. Like it was clearly they were just there to design money, a better system where basically anybody who tries to copy it today can't get away with that. Like, no. It's just not going to happen. It's going to immediately pull a price. It's going to immediately be, look at the opportunity for greed and profit, like, that I'm going to pull from this. And the attempt of trying to make some sort of kind of independent or objective system in this atmosphere, like after Bitcoin has been invented, like, you're right, it just it just seems almost silly. Like it's not possible at this point.
Yeah, and it's just another one of those many elements about Bitcoin that makes it like gives it that kind of mythical allure that and there's so
Hmm.
many elements of that, but the one is that it was launched by this like benevolent anonymous creator, he and a small group of people who worked on it without compensation, because out of idealistic for idealistic reasons and stuff, when nobody was looking, when nobody thought this was possible, and that gave it the necessary oxygen and breathing room it needed to survive in the early days. Because had
Yeah.
anybody thought like, well, this is going to supplant the existing system, then of course there would have been pushback or anything like that, or people trying to take advantage. But and then obviously Satoshi disappears. I mean, it's like you couldn't make this stuff up. It's like no, not even a movie has a better like origin story, and just all the ways that it's like grown since then. That's one of the conviction inspiring aspects of it for me, which may be silly because you want to be looking at hard details and technology and more rational stuff, but like I can't escape the fact that all of these like all of these kind of mythical attributes of its origin just makes me think like this has to be real. Like this is how this thing would emerge.
We've talked about it a lot in the Raleigh Bitcoin meetup podcast that we do. That like everybody, it's funny how often that comes up. Is just that like you could not write fiction that's that like it just has such a and you say like we want to be objective, we want to think about the code, and we want to but people are captured by stories.
Yeah.
like like a fascinating and powerful story is what grabs people, and Bitcoin could not have a more fascinating and more powerful story behind it. And so much of that is in this completely anonymous mythical character that created it and then just stepped away, who never cashed out billions of dollars worth of coins. And it just, it does. It seems so uh, fateful. Like it seems so like
Right.
had to be that way.
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
it's hard to believe that it's a true story that ended up being so perfectly cinematic in that way.
Yeah, exactly. Like you can already hear in the classrooms or however people are educated 50 years from now, this being told, and everyone in the classroom being like, yeah,
Whoa.
yeah, exactly. Like, yeah, that sounds totally legit. How else could it happen? Um, but yeah, so let's fast forward or bring it up to current date. And before I do that, just one last question about your history in this place. You mentioned the tops of the hype cycles, right? And kind of
Hmm.
despite your more rational, logical mind, well, that kind of gets thrown out the window a little bit, right? And we think now is hyper Bitcoinization. It's actually happening. This isn't irrational. It's happening now. And so December 2017, I'm sure we all, to varying degrees, perhaps, we're all like, holy shit, cat's out of the bag. The world's taking notice. This is going to happen tomorrow. Everything's about to change. And then
Yep.
a month later, you're like, oh no.
What happened?
So my question for you is, having gone through a couple of them, in December
Uh-huh.
2017, did you think this was the moment, or did you just think this is another hype cycle and we're going to go down? And if you thought the latter, did you trade it, and if so, how?
Um, I uh, I did not trade it like I hope to on the next one.
Yeah, I want to
I
ask you
was
about
not
that too.
prepared, and I do intend to not really trade, but to sink when it's like when there's a life changing amount of money. Like I intend to park it somewhere if we go 2 to 3x the stock to flow ratio. That's what I think I'm going to use as my barometer next time around, because we didn't really have that as a good model on the previous run.
Hmm.
As far as like my thoughts on it, um, uh, I think it's so hard to call. Like when it went up to 5,000, it was like, ooh, this might be the top, and then it went up again, hit 10,000, then it crashed back down for just a little bit. Like every one of them feels like it could just be a minor crash and another run. after 20,000, I seriously thought we were going to go to 35 or 40 before it was going to be over. So I didn't make any decisions there. And then you've got like a week to really like make that decision before you're all the way on the way down, and then you're just feeling the pain and you're like, do I sell, do I buy, what do I do? And so it's so hard to time the market, and I try to just stay away from it.
Yeah.
I got punished in the altcoin casino, and had to pay taxes on it, so it's like, oh god, what have I done? And so I don't really want to. I've kind of stepped away from that. I still want to kind of I want to just get good at seeing the gradual trends, like kind of those long-term swings.
Yeah.
So I'll probably play like just a little bit of money just to see if I can kind of get a feel for the cycle.
Yeah.
But no, I was half and half. I was like, okay, maybe I should put some money in something, and then the other half of me was like, nope, this is it. We're done. This is the moon. Let me start getting my space suit on. I haven't ordered my oxygen tanks yet.
But the crazy thing is what the next top. It's probably going to be crazier than we all even think it is now. So if everyone's thinking like 1 to 300K, maybe it's going to be 5 plus.
Yeah.
Like who knows? But to me, it's just like. It's such a it seems to be the way that Bitcoin grows, right? These kind of boom and bust cycles. And I don't know if that'll always be the case or just until we reach a certain economic mass or level. But it's like, it's so tempting because these tops and the subsequent drop-offs just, and I think, I think not trading is the best approach 99% of the time. But if you have these like super predictable instances where you could, 30% your stack, add 30% of your coins to your existing stack or something like that. It's like, there's gotta be a smart way, like a methodical, non-emotional way to capitalize on that, And so I'm starting to ask more people about it now because, whether it's coming in 2 years, 3 years, like I'd like to be more prepared than I was last time, let's say.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. And what's funny is if I had looked at it, if I had really kind of stepped back from the emotion of the 2017 bubble.
So hard though, but yeah.
It's so hard. I know I could have objectively seen it, and I really kind of was looking at the indicators that were like, this is overbought. But I was trying to compare it back to 2013 and call like when the very top was going to be, and I remember that there was like 100% move within a day. Like it was like on particularly on Mount Gox, which got insane, or maybe it was like 70 or 80% or something. But it was a huge swing within the day, and even on like those huge candles, we didn't have a candle close. I think it was like 30% or 40% or something at the top. So I thought we would have one more run. That was kind of what led me to think that maybe we would go to 30 or 40 from here.
Yeah.
And I didn't really take in or factor in the fact that we were going to have, with the greater liquidity, the likelihood of that sort of move was going to continue to diminish.
Yeah.
Like we were going to get less volatility at these major peaks. But the fact that I know so many who are in the same position as you and I, trying to better prepare for the next one, it makes me think that it's going to be, the spring is going to be loaded even more intensely on the next run, because we'll have these little gradual backups that people are like, okay, this is the top. Let me buy this commercial property, or like, let me cash out this amount so I can add 30% to my stack. And then it takes a break for just a little bit. It's like, okay, good, I called the top. And then we do a whole nother run and everybody's like, oh God, what have I done? So like it could end up being a self-fulfilling prophecy where the opposite happens, where we exaggerate it yet again,
right?
Because everybody is trying to call the top and then,
sure.
Failing.
But my opinion on that is, well, first, I think there probably was many of those people in 2017. It just wasn't us. We were perhaps the suckers or whatever. But I think the next, because coinciding with the bubble is a tremendous amount of new money entering the space, right? So like whether that new money is like an institutional rush or kind of reigniting the retail rush or whatever it turns out to be, they'll be less prepared. It's more new territory for them. So I think myself and you and like people that have been in the space and planning for this, probably like we think like, whoa, if we talk about it and everybody does it, it'll be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But I think the scale of the rushing into it will be such that whatever we're doing is probably not gonna, we're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot by making those plans. And the flip side of that is like, what if it was you just took a super conservative approach? Like, so let's say in 2017 you got out at 10, and then you saw it double to go to 20. You'd be like, oh shit! But if you played it properly on the downturn, you still would have done tremendously well getting out at 10 and then reaccumulating even at 5 or 6. So. Yeah. It's really hard to not be overly greedy, but if you just took a super conservative approach and said the next top, I want to increase my stack by like 20%. Gives me margin of error on both sides. Like I'd like to think I could pull it off, but I haven't put down the strategy yet, and so that's why I'm asking you, and I'm going to be talking to people about it in the next in the upcoming months, because I wouldn't mind having like a good non-emotional strategy in place that I can just pull the trigger on when the time comes and the indicators suggest it, and not with everything, of course, but whatever you're willing to play with. So we'll see.
Yeah. I hope so. And you're probably right. Like with the whole, like I want to think that like, oh man, like it might be a self-fulfilling prophecy and we'll have everybody doing it, but there's so much. Like you forget to think about like what is not what everyone else knows.
Exactly.
Like we were just talking about last night at the Raleigh Bitcoin meetup, that we were talking about the guy who was investing in silver, and he was like he did not even know about the stock to flow ratio. Like I'm just like like silver is an old investment, and like it's been around forever, and they were just looking at the gold to silver ratio, not the fact that silver can, as soon as silver price increases, they're going to ramp up production. They can double, triple production in the market if there's room in the silver price to do it. Like there's hardly any cap on that anymore, except for the market price that drives people into that. So it'll just come crashing back down. And now I just don't think about it. It's like, oh, well, no, I would never, like this would be like when I cash out, because gold is not, the flow cannot adjust that quickly. Silver can. And like, so like you just kind of get used to thinking that what I've learned is not special. Like it's information that everybody is fully aware of. And it's like, well, no, that is not the case at all. I could have made the exact same claim in 2017 because I was kind of thinking the same way. I just really didn't have the courage to pull the trigger.
Or you could have made that claim in 2011 when you first got into Bitcoin. And we mentioned reasons why I didn't get in when I first encountered it. And I do think it was partially that, like, there's no way that I could have unique perception and insight and have stumbled on something so important. Little old me, like, and and it's not that I wasn't a confident person, but I guess in that regard, I just thought there's no way I could have stumbled on something that, one, is going to make me filthy rich, and two, is going to be this like global revolution, once in a species event. Like, I didn't just because I'm a smart person happen on it, and because I thought that way, that probably contributed to it, right? So I think, as you said, we often think that if we know it, everybody else must know it, and that kind of perverts how we might be thinking about something, when the case is like you and I and many people listening to this podcast are like balls deep in this space, right? We read, especially you read every goddamn article there is, right? And many of us stay up to date via Twitter and podcasts and stuff. And like your average person, even if they believe in Bitcoin and think it's really cool and think it is the future of the monetary system, they have like most of their day is filled up with family and job and gym and all this kind of stuff. Like they ain't familiar, they ain't deep as we are, So there's going to be an information asymmetry there. And, I guess that's what we're talking about. It's like we got to believe that we actually have that, and we got to work to establish it by staying informed, and then
Hmm.
we should probably try to capitalize on it to some degree.
Yeah. And what's funny is that like if the more we actually speculate based on that real knowledge, the like we as speculators would be creating the like tempering the overbought or the undersold or the overbought or the oversold nature of the market. Like we would be the price stabilizers because we would be like, okay, it is
It's gone.
3x the stock to flow right now. We need selling pressure. Let's capitalize on this and bring the price back down so the it doesn't get too out of control. Like we would be the pressure that's bringing us back to that equilibrium,
Yeah,
which is funny. Like, so the more people that actually do it, it's a market service in a sense of
yeah, yeah.
finding that real price.
And let's not kid ourselves, man. The OGs in the space and the people that knew what they were at in December 2017, they were doing what we just described. Like that's why
Oh yeah.
the market turned that way, is because
Hmm.
they were all playing it with more intelligence, more information, more emotional stability, more preparation than everybody else. So everybody else was hoping that this was going to 40, 60, 70, moon, and they were like, nope, this is where we're this is where we're drawing the line for this particular cycle. So
Yeah, I should have listened to Trace Mayer. He would publish his Mayer multiple thing, and he'd be like, "Ooh, we're way overbought right now.
yeah.
We're running hot." And he'd be like, "Nah, we're going to the moon."
You don't know what you're talking about, Trace.
You don't even know how revolutions work.
Yeah, but that's a great example. Like whether some combination of Mayer multiple and a lot of the other interest, the stock to flow model, and a couple of the other things that have come out relatively recently that show trajectories and potential highs and lows and price ranges and stuff. Like mash all that together, let it spit out like a conservative range, and try to capitalize. In any case, moving on because we could talk about that for a while. What's you're so like we just said, we're so deep in the space, and you in particular, because of your podcast, you consume so much of this material, and then not only dictate it, but then put it through your own meat grinder and digest it and comment on it. What new information, what new perspectives, what exciting pieces of information, knowledge, wisdom around Bitcoin have you gained recently that has expanded your understanding of it?
I think one of the things that a different way I've started to think about Bitcoin is that, like, because it is the money, like it was one of those things to come to terms. Like, I really had to get my head around the idea of how Bitcoin would work as a settlement system, that it was going to be that base layer. And I have constantly worked back through like what I know about internet protocols and TCP/IP and HTTP and how these things built layers to eventually get us to the application stage where what was essentially an incredibly annoying and long process of, I mean, there's so much that goes on when, like just like when that router went out just a little while ago and the power blinked out, is how much has to happen to establish a connection, find routes to like where we're going. There's a massive amount of stuff happening in the background. But underneath it all is the core of the internet, which is TCP/IP, and it's like 400 megabytes or something like that. It is the entire table of IP addresses on the internet. And that is what everything leans on. Everything is layers built on top of that. So Bitcoin as a settlement layer, I have begun to think about it more, and I love the analogy of it as a court system. We don't have a judge sign a receipt every time we go to Starbucks. We don't need a judge to sign a receipt every time we go to Starbucks. It's not that important. So, but if we can attach it, if we can extend the power of a single Bitcoin contract into thousands of transactions with layers, we can create all of those payment systems and all of those things in an incredibly lightweight and robust underlying layer, just like TCP/IP, which is very small. And uh, so I've come to realize that I think in the not too distant future, the idea of a single person owning a UTXO will become more and more rare. That we will have like hierarchical layers of ownership of a single UTXO. They will be broken into multiple contracts on top of each other, and the main function of a Bitcoin transaction will be in order to set up network connections, like financial network connections between participants on this in this ecosystem. So it will be for building liquidity for some other like off-chain or just like a Lightning contract. And I think that's kind of how this is going to expand out to accommodate for millions, even billions of people.
Yeah, that's and that's a relative. When did you start thinking this way? Was it since kind of the introduction of Lightning, or is it even more recent?
It was really when I started to dig into Lightning. Aaron Van Veertem, I've been calling him Von Werdum forever, and then I had him on the show, and he was like, "Yeah, it's Van Veertem or whatever." He's like, "That's close." And I was like, "Oh God, I've been saying it wrong forever." Um, his series on the Lightning Network, understanding the Lightning Network, it was like a 3-part series. That was a major breakthrough in understanding how that contract worked, and I kind of had a second aha moment. Like the Lightning Network was immediately as fascinating to me as Bitcoin was originally. Like there was just so many different aspects to dig into, and the idea of like a built-in reserve and insurance contract, and then a punishment clause when things go wrong. Like the whole how that contract branched was so fascinating when I finally wrapped my head around it. And I love that series. And I tried to do a follow up to like kind of give a couple of analogies to make it easy to picture in your head. Not sure how well I did. A couple of people have told me that that really helped them. But that was really the beginning of it. But it was probably only like 6 months ago that I was like, wow, Bitcoin is really going to be a foundation layer for capital markets. And the average user is probably going to hold an extended piece of a contract that they own, and they can take to court. They can take to the Bitcoin network, which will be the financial arbiter of everything that goes on, the ultimate decider of who owns what in the network. And in the case of a dispute, we will go to the Bitcoin network and be like, prove that I have this part of this Merkle tree that says I own this amount of coin, and I have to pay the court fee, quote unquote, in order to settle with somebody that I'm disputing. And I'm the final owner, but the rest of the network, the bulk of the network, will be used to set up capital markets that allow for these incredible applications like payment networks and even tokens and gift cards and all kinds of things attached to the value of Bitcoin.
That's amazing, man. You know, when you're speaking just now, it makes me think of, I ask as part of the rapid fire questions, and it's a bit unfair to include it there, but it's a common question to say to people ask, or that you try to explain to people, what is Bitcoin, right? Of course, it's this new thing, it's getting lots of hype, so there's going to be a lot of people Googling, asking their friend, what have you, what is Bitcoin? And man, what is the answer to that question? Because the narratives that continue to emerge around it, as the tech develops, as layers are developed on top of it, and even if it doesn't change, but it's seen to be more than it was originally seen to be as time goes on, it's like, that's a really tough question to answer. What is Bitcoin?
I think of it as like if I had to sum it up in like a sentence, I think it's a digital property like ledger, like an ownership layer for digital value on the internet. And like that's something that the internet, I think Bitcoin is like stage 2 of the internet.
Right.
And I think just like you don't download an app that isn't connected to the internet. we don't communicate. We don't have media that isn't connected to the internet. Like that's what an app is. All of this software, all this technology, you get it from an app store from the internet.
Right.
Everything is tied back to the internet. In that same way, I think finance and value will be tied to Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And it will be layers upon layers on extensions, and you won't be holding real value in the digital world if it's not a contract that can be executed on the Bitcoin network.
Yeah, and I agree, and it's just so fascinating that, of course you have to cater your message to your audience, right? So if you're speaking to someone they're just going to gloss over entirely if you start talking about Lightning Network and contracts and legal arbiters and stuff. So you have to go with it's digital gold. It's programmed to be scarce. It's infinitely scarce when it's fully issued. Blah blah blah. That whole narrative. Maybe for people that are a bit more sophisticated, you can actually kind of be like, well, it's a bit more. It's a bit more than that as well. So how much time do you have? But it's just that I'm sure that's one of the frustrating things that I'm sure everybody encounters. It's like when they have to answer that question, or if someone presses them like, man, this is just bullshit. Like what Bitcoin anyways? It's like, where do I start? How do I talk about this? And it's always changing. So it's kind of hard to nail down.
Yeah, it's so hard to portray. There's so many different facets to get to that end statement of, okay, it's a digital property layer for the internet.
Exactly.
That if you just say that to somebody who doesn't know, I mean, I was having a conversation the other day with somebody who was sort of familiar with Bitcoin, and it just struck me, like we were in the conversation and I was saying something about, so when the next halving happens and blah, 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 blah. And then they were like, what's a halving? And I was like, oh man. Oh, so far. Okay, let me step this back. Have you been following any? I've been talking for like an hour. I feel like I've been 7 layers out of the scope of what was a reasonable conversation here. And so like there's so many things to build a foundation for understanding what it means when I say it is a digital property layer for the internet. So that is a never-ending task.
And what's interesting, and what I wonder how it's going to play out, is like when we talk about the internet today, right? And you talk about TCP, IP, and this kind of stuff, and like most people don't know anything about that. If you ask them what the internet was, they'd say like it's a global information transfer system, something like that, right? And so it'll be interesting to see where the limits of the intellectual understanding of Bitcoin stop when it reaches a mainstream. So the mainstream may in the future say Bitcoin is, electronic value transfer, digital gold over, information networks or something like that. And all the things that you just described that will ultimately power, all these different elements of the financial system, that'll be way above their pay grade. It'll just work as the internet works for Netflix today, and they won't think about it. Yep. So maybe it'll be like the mainstream narrative will reach like an apex, like you'll reach a limit, and then everything else will just be too technical, but it'll facilitate all the different functions that everyone will be using day to day in their lives.
Yeah, I imagine it. It's funny because like the history of the internet and the early protocol wars for like open source and like competing internet protocols that happened back in the day, like all of that I felt like gave me such insight into Bitcoin. And then studying also like the peer-to-peer networks and protocols that were out, like why did BitTorrent survive when so many of those others didn't? That's another one of my favorite series. There's a lessons from BitTorrent, or BitTorrent lessons or something like that.
One of yours?
Yeah, I've read it on the show. It's by Simon Morris. He worked at BitTorrent Incorporated and for like 10 years. And he kind of talks about the history, and he like establishes a couple of rules for like what survives in decentralization. Like you have to be breaking a rule. That is the purpose of decentralization, is you have to be breaking some rule that people can't get around otherwise. That's obviously piracy for BitTorrent. and like minimum viable decentralization. Don't try to decentralize everything. Decentralize the core function of it and leave everything else to the next layers, or to like we didn't have to decentralize the Pirate Bay. It just worked. It was resilient enough that we could keep putting it up, and we have alternatives, torrent indexes, and all this stuff. But it's a great series on kind of understanding um, what exactly, how exactly these protocols evolve and survive, and why. And that is not something that is well understood.
Yeah.
Just like you said, most people have no idea how the internet came about. They have no idea that it was really around for 20 years before Netscape. That, 1995 was it, the first web browser is only 24 years old. Everything that we think of as part of the internet is less than 25 years. And that was when the browser was created, not when it was mainstream. That was when it first arrived on the scene. Everything else after that is like handful of the biggest companies in the world are 9 years old, you
It's
know?
crazy. That is so crazy. I mean, I mention this probably too often, so people that listen to this show are probably, getting sick and tired of me saying it. But I always wonder like why more people don't challenge the status quo, don't see how fast things are changing and moving in whatever
Mm-hmm.
capacity. Um, and I always say like all you got to do is zoom out a little bit, and you'll see how fast that things are actually happening, whether it's changing for for bad or for good. And
Yeah.
something like, and we're in a period now where it's almost like you don't even have to zoom out that much anymore. In our remote history, you'd have to zoom out 100 years, 500 years, 1,000 years to observe change, especially in the ancient world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, like you just said, you zoom out 10 years and there's no apps, there's no smartphone, there's no
Nope.
any of that stuff. And now it's literally the core of our world, and the largest companies in the world are the ones that brought that technology to the mainstream effectively. Apple, Google,
Yeah.
Facebook, this kind of stuff. We still, I think, as Bitcoiners, think like nobody knows when this is going to pop and hyper Bitcoinization will be here and all that kind of stuff. But damn, man, it could very well. I think we're all conservative so that we don't get like emotionally crushed if it doesn't happen on our timeline and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And we want to be conservative for other reasons as well. But maybe 10 years from now, this is all like a fait accompli. And people are just like,
I
well, yeah, of course. you know?
I can't help but think like we really kind of went into the same conversation last night at the Raleigh Bitcoin meetup. Was that we were talking about like timescales of like how quickly this was going to happen, and I can't get around the fact like I want to be reserved. I want to be like, okay, 30 years, 40 years makes the most sense for really making huge structural like foundational changes to what we think of as the system that is running things, because I think Bitcoin is attacking at the foundation. I really think it is a bottom up restructuring of the whole thing.
Agreed.
And um, it's so hard to look at it objectively because it feels like my objective answer is always a much, much shorter time period. But I always kind of feel like maybe I'm just crazy, psychotic, bullish. And, that's what's leading me to this conclusion. But I think in 9 years, I can't remember who it says, like Dare Gigi or somebody was actually pointing this out on Twitter, and I saw this. I was like, man, was that in 9 years in the next 9 years we will have 3 halvings in 9 years. And in this next one, we are going to be competing with gold in the one that's 248 days away or something. And we are going to be hitting very close to gold's stock to flow ratio. And then in the one following that, it's going to wipe it out, because we'll reach parity with gold stock to flow sometime in that period, but just because of the constant inflation during those 4 years. I mean, I think we'll actually cross sometime like a year before that next halving. Then we'll hit 2024. Then we'll hit 2028. It is going to be the hardest asset that has ever existed in the history of the world. Like, like hands down, like nothing, no, not even a close comparison. Everything's off the table. Like we have no idea how fast or how powerful an asset like that can soak up wealth from the competing monies around the world.
Especially
And we
when
have
you
no idea how
attach
it's
all
going
the
to play out.
functionality that it has. It's not
I
just
know.
a better gold. It,
It's also an ecosystem. It's a
right,
whole
right,
capital markets. It's
right.
crazy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, it's like, who the hell knows? Did anybody think? Can you imagine when it was launched in 2009, Satoshi and Hal and the rest of the gang? Do you think they'd be like, yeah, in 10 years the president will probably be talking about this? It's like, maybe because some of those guys were pretty darn, like, had pretty great foresight, but that's a bit of a stretch, and to give it another 10 years from this point where it's like, yeah, man, and you know how they say, first slowly, then all at once. I mean, could
Yeah.
be a trickle for another 5 years, and then it becomes obvious. It's like, well, yeah, of course, of course that's the system.
Duh. Oh yeah, it's Bitcoin though, obviously.
All right, man, I'm gonna break into the rapid fire questions. Just before I do, though,
Okay.
I can't resist asking you about a tweet, just because it's one of the many elements of current global culture and society that I just boggles my mind. And you shared a now this video on Twitter, I think today, and it was this, I'm sure, compassionate, lovely young woman, basically speaking for a fairly long amount. I think it was like a 5-minute video on
hmm
how we should no longer be using the term guys because it's a form of cognitive oppression and all the rest of it. Just want you to expand on that tweet.
If that's what we are spending our time complaining about, then we better have solved every other problem in existence. Like if we're worried about like we are in control of our own feelings. Like it is our responsibility how we respond to other people and other stuff. Like if somebody calls me stupid, it is my fault if I'm offended by that because I should not value their opinion of me. They don't know me and like I don't care who they are. Like it is my obligation to be in control of myself and be like, all right, like I can deal with that.
Right.
Like grow a thick skin. And I think we're going through this crazy cultural transition with the internet where like we're just kind of coming to terms with the fact that we can hear each other. Like that we have always been isolated in our little local communities and we've shared our own social norms. And I think the internet is changing that in a massive way. We're just so connected now in a way that we never have been before that we're having to come to terms with. It's like one giant organism realizing that, oh my God, we think bad thoughts. And uh, so there's this huge clash as we kind of get into each other's heads and realize we don't all agree on everything. And it's like, it's just a maturation process. And I mostly think it's comical. The outrage culture is, I really think it's an exaggeration of what it actually is. Like, I think there is a lot of now this that just thought, ooh, people are going to retweet and talk about
Sure,
how
sure.
insane this is. Like it's that grab people's attention. People
Clickbait,
love to be,
financially driven, all
yeah,
that stuff.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And I mostly, I don't let it get to me.
Right.
And I love hey guys. I'm never gonna stop saying hey guys. Like guys is my favorite word.
Yeah.
and but it's absurd. It's
But
absurd, but it's a little fun at the same
it,
time.
it's totally absurd, and I agree 100% with everything you said. But it is one of those weird, like, of course, we're going to see disruption on so many levels for all the different
hmm
converging technologies. And, people like to say disruption as like a buzzword if you're trying to raise money or whatever. But like disruption is actually an uncomfortable thing usually. It's not like,
hmm
yay, we're going to be disrupted. It's like, no, like you're going to be made to be uncomfortable for a while because this is going to change a lot of the things that you've come to rely on, come to understand,
Yeah.
the ways you perceive things. And, so as you said, it's probably to be expected when the world comes online as a super brain and we all get to interact with each other and we all get to see what we're thinking and see what we're wearing and see where we're eating and see who we're hanging out with. Like, It's like,
Yeah.
whoa, like this is a totally way more information than we ever thought we would have on each other. Again, even only 10 years ago. So yeah, it's going to take
Mm-hmm.
some wrestling with to see how to deal with it. The only thing is, I find it funny too, but it's like it is a bit. All you're right. These media companies are motivated to put out stuff that they know will get engagement, and there's almost nothing that gets people's engagement more than giving them an outlet to be upset. Right? This
Mm-hmm.
outrage thing. People want to be upset and tell people they're upset and prove their point, and that's how and so it's their financial incentive is in getting people to act that way.
Mm-hmm.
My only, and that's fine, fuck it, like you said, it's your responsibility to not be triggered, not be engaged by that stuff, and I certainly am not. I find it funny, but so many people seem to be, that like I'm just concerned that it's not only is it responding to like a small element of the culture, but it's also creating culture at the same time. And you know I think it could easily have detrimental effects. And that's why I think this personal sovereignty, this individual sovereignty movement that is occurring now with kind of Bitcoin as one of the focal points is so important, because that
Oh yeah.
wrapped up in that whole movement is, as you said, like your rights are your responsibility, and it's also your
Mm-hmm.
responsibility how you respond to people that you communicate with or to people that are interacting with you. It's your it's your fucking responsibility. Stop putting it out on the world and telling other people they have to change for you. That's not how it
Yeah.
works. You change
No.
however you want to change. You take your responsibility. You make sure you're sovereign and that people can't lean on you, and that's how the world will function optimally,
Exactly. Exactly. Like it is not anyone else's obligation to change what they think or what they say or the shirt that they are wearing to make you comfortable with yourself.
Exactly.
Like, like that's your job. And I think it's also a consequence of we have a huge. It's really just like a collective identity crisis, and I think it's a transition. Like you said, 10 years ago, we had no cameras or microphones in our pockets. There was no app to share what I'm doing and eating right now and what I'm thinking and what, like, have this ongoing every second conversation with thousands of people of exactly our first response to some stupid thing that we see on the internet or something that some politician says. But I think it looks like there are negative consequences, but I think getting it out in the open is an incredibly important part of figuring out who we are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's inevitably going to be messy. Like when you figure out, like I think back just in the trying to have like a collective analogy to something that I've gone through in my own life. Like when I've had major shifts in how I think about the world or like my Overton window of what's possible. I mean, Bitcoin was a huge part of that. I went through a couple of political shifts, like from essentially like very socially, like almost Democrat liberal in high school to, but still like kind of a flag waving Republican to just abandoning the whole thing altogether. Like those were not easy transitions. It was very painful. Like I have had moments where I was incredibly sad. I felt like I had lost something that I thought of was part of me. And it just wasn't fun. It was enlightening and insane, and I love it when I look back on it. But it was messy and it hurt. And I think part of what we're doing is going through that at a massive scale.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people in our current system and with kind of the huge debt bubble and the horrible incentives we've had from an economic standpoint that so many people feel like they have no control over anything in their lives. I think that's why we have a suicide epidemic. Is just that people feel like they are completely at the whim of everyone else as to what the conditions of their life are. And I think Bitcoin is a massive part of solving that problem because I think so much of it actually stems from horrible economic foundations.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think it's a process.
I think that's extremely well put. I think that the economic and financial incentives that we've had in place as a result of the structures in the existing system have created, or at the very least, fostered a lot of the more negative behaviors we're seeing. And again, this is another thing that I've talked about with a number of the initial guests on the show, is just that for so many of us, I mean, again, I don't think I've spoken with anybody yet who hasn't kind of echoed this. It's that you come out into the world, and whenever you have that kind of pierce the veil moment where you start to see the world as, not as like when you were a kid and, oh, the world is so great and it's always going to be great and sunny days and swimming pools and ice cream, and you realize like, ooh, the world's got some dark corners, and I have some dark corners. And how am I going to navigate that? And it's causing me to contract or be fearful, or the uncertainty is crippling, or whatever it might be. The emergence, and you look out on the world and you study all this stuff. You study the financial system, the banking system, the pharmaceutical lobby, and all this kind of stuff, and you have that hopeless feeling. And Bitcoin is there now. And again, for anyone who's listening who's not really in the weeds like you and I, they'll probably think like we're taking a bit too much license with this analogy. But for the people that understand this thing the most that I've spoken to, unanimously agree that it was a source of light, and it started to give them hope that this ship could get turned around, and started to give them more hopeful thoughts for a brighter future. And like, as you said, in a society and culture globally today where suicide and depression and things of that nature are at epidemic levels and rising rapidly, what's more important than something like that can make people see things in a more hopeful manner? I mean, it's fucking it's incredible, and one of the reasons why we should try to be push this thing ahead, as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Okay, rapid fire time. You know the drill. Right. I'll say a question, you answer however long you like. There's a series of these rapid fire questions, and then at the end there's a series of word association questions whereby I say a word, you say the first word that pops into your mind.
Okay.
All right.
All right. Yeah.
I'm not sure how you're doing on time, so you adjust your answers accordingly if you need to, go anywhere. And I apologize for the first one, but what is money?
Money is it's a good. Oh man, that's a tough one.
That's why I apologize.
It is a language of value. Ooh. It is decided and it emerges naturally from a community, and it is that good in society which enables the most honest means of exchange when it emerges naturally.
Nice. If you had to explain Bitcoin to your grandmother or someone over 80, what would you say?
It's money in a digital form that nobody owns, nobody controls other than you. It's just native to the internet. I wouldn't go any deeper than that. I just feel like there's this new money. If they want to learn more about it, that's great. But just know that it's not run by a company, not run by a country. It is just a digital thing that is out there that is money. You own it. Nobody can tell you where or when you can spend it. It's all up to you. And nobody can take it from you without your permission. You are the sole owner of that digital thing.
What is the primary reason why Bitcoin is important or interesting to you?
It's independent. It is its own system from top to bottom. Nothing external has any real influence over the internal conditions. It is just like, and that's one of those things that makes it such a fascinating analogy that to the idea that it's a digital organism of some sort, which seems crazy out there. And I've had a really hard time coming to terms with the concept because it seems so just batshit. But one of those aspects of life is that it is a internal system that takes the external chaos and turns it into consistent order. Like that is one of those things that life does. It is a barrier to the chaos of the world to create stability internally. And Bitcoin does that in the digital realm. And it does so in the face of incredible chaos, of incredibly unpredictable conditions, computers entering and leaving the system, users entering and leaving the system, data coming from any aspect and direction. It could be flooded, could be like all these incentives, this entire structure of incentives and computers and software is all working together to create this insanely stable, robust, indestructible digital system that is internally stable and is just resistant to all of this external chaos. It's fascinating to me that it is completely standalone.
What does the quote unquote sovereign individual mean to you?
It means that, like, I think people mistake a fundamental idea of liberty. I think liberty is just responsibility. When someone is free, it means that they are wholly responsible for themselves. And that comes with positive and negative. And I think that's why most people are actually afraid of freedom or liberty, is because it means that my choices are what led me here. It means that I am totally responsible for my life, my money, my safety. And I think that's the fundamental trade-off of liberty. You are free to pursue that which you want in your life. You're free to pursue your dreams. You're free to decide right or wrong and pay the consequences of that correct or incorrect decision. And it is no one else's responsibility to make up the difference. They can if they want, and you have the right to help other people. But ultimately, you are responsible for yourself. And I think the future is in sovereign individuals where if we decide to, we can take full responsibility for our lives. And I think the cryptoconomy and the idea of this digital sovereignty is going to make that possible.
Beautiful. How long after you first heard of Bitcoin did you start learning more about it and purchase it?
Same night. Like I said, I was up all night that night. I mean, we went for hours and hours and hours as soon as I heard about it. As far as purchasing it, there were not many ways to purchase it when I first heard about it. And we went through an incredibly lengthy, bizarre, and creepy, shady process to buy it. Because the only way to get money onto Mt. Gox was to, like, there was like some sort of kiosk thing, and then we deposited money into some random person's account in the bank, and we actually had to put in, they required us to put in like a specific amount of change over top of the amount. So if we were putting in like $40, we had to put in like $40.15, and the 15 cent was what made them delineate one user from the other, because it was just a random deposit. And then they would issue the $40 credit or whatever to some shady account online that I would transfer to some other shady account online, which I could then use to deposit into Mt. Gox. It was an awful, crazy process. I don't remember exactly how long it took, but we spent a couple of weeks trying to figure it out and then got it sorted.
It's funny. It's funny you say that, because I think that's what turned a lot of people away initially. And now that you're saying that, I remember me too, because I was intrigued, and I went to like see like, oh, maybe I'll pick some of this stuff up. And I just remember being confronted like, oh, this is way too much of a hassle, and just, bailing on it. Damn it.
Oh yeah.
And so how long after that? Was a few weeks after you had that all-nighter?
I think it was a few weeks. We were FOMOing really hard, so we were trying to get in, and obviously got in at the absolute wrong time during that period, during that hype cycle. But yeah, I don't think it was a very long after that.
What has been your most effective method of educating people about Bitcoin in conversation or more formally? I think I know the answer.
Just being easy about it. Not pushing it on people is like I had a couple of really good friends that were skeptics, like to the point that they kind of wanted to pick on and jab at me about it. Like skeptics, they were like, "How's that Bitcoin thing doing for you?" kind of thing.
We all got it, man.
Yeah, and I would just be like, "It's doing all right." I would just always kind of recognize that it made perfect sense from their perspective to see it as something silly. I would never ever get offended. And I think so much is in, like, the reason I have a lot of friends who look at Bitcoin seriously is because of my confidence in it. is that every time they brought up some sort of concern, it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Like, I get why you would think that. I don't think it's a concern at all. But I would never push an explanation on them. And the more confident I was about it, and the calmer I was about not pushing it in their face, I found the more people would gravitate back, and randomly while we were just sitting out having a beer somewhere and be like, so explain to me again why this thing is actually like independent, like why this thing is actually like real money and stuff. And I'd be like, all right. Like their interest would continue to grow. And I think that was really a big part of it. Everybody who was a skeptic, I'd be like, makes perfect sense. I'll be here when you're ready to ask about it.
Yeah. What movie or song is most related to Bitcoin in your opinion?
Ooh, that's a good one. V for Vendetta? I don't know. Could be that or The Matrix. I'm gonna go with sci-fi. I'm gonna go with The Matrix.
Solid choice. Solid choice. Can Bitcoin be stopped? If so, what is Bitcoin's biggest vulnerability? If not, why not?
I think it could. I think it's incredibly unlikely. And I come to think of it more as like the internet has major vulnerabilities. Like the internet has security holes all over the place. The routing system is not very secure. Like BGP routing has major vulnerabilities, but the internet is still ubiquitous. The internet still has basically taken over everything, and we deal with those insecurities. We pay the costs of those insecurities, and the system continues to work in spite of all of that. And no system is perfect. Quantum computing always sounded like a boogeyman to me. Like it seemed like a silly concern that everybody's more scared about it the less they can actually explain it. It seemed like, and so it's always, I guess you could say, like this odd man out as to can you get the private key from public key. Every cryptography, at least so far, has been eventually broken. Every major cryptographic system looks like SHA-256 is secure. Might not be. We don't really know what's going to happen in 30 or 40 years as far as that stuff's concerned. Mm-hmm. But I think there's a reasonable possibility that Bitcoin can easily evolve, or, well, not easily, painfully succeed at evolving past that. But that's kind of, I think the security of the cryptography and maybe a huge state actor having a concerted, very deliberate, extremely well-funded attack on it could really mess things up for a period of time. But if it does not get cryptographically broken, I think it will survive. That's not a huge concern of mine as far as like the state actor thing.
What was your most recent aha or level up in your understanding of Bitcoin?
Probably thinking about the Lightning Network and the fact that like the Bitcoin settlement layer will be more to build financial networks. That transactions themselves will be used to make network connections of this property that we are exchanging back and forth. And the idea of just like a one-to-one, I'm signing a transaction from me to you, will become more and more rare just because the security of the system is so incredibly valuable that it will only make sense to do normal payments and exchanges on second, third, and or fourth layers on this thing. That's probably my biggest shift in the last like 6 to 8 months.
What do you think will be Bitcoin's biggest impact on society?
The complete inversion of debt culture, of the debt and credit based money, the fact that in a Bitcoin denominated money, Governments can't run deficits. It's just not possible. Like, they actually have to have the money from somebody has to actually lend it to them, and they can't lend it to themselves. So if they're going to run a deficit this year, they better run a surplus the next year, or it just collapses in on itself and they have no purchasing power anymore. So I think the fact that it is going to create a systemic imbalance that is literally embedded, like the whole fractional reserve banking, is not possible with Bitcoin as the underlying asset. I think that is going to have multiple derivative, order of magnitude effects on how we organize, how the economy works, how we think about debt. 0% APR, 12 months, 0% financing. I think all of that is just 30 or 40 years ago, that didn't exist. I think everything that we think of like normal finance, everybody's got to be in the stock market to have savings, all of that stuff, all of it's going to go. I think we're going to have a huge shift in just cultural and day-to-day, what it means to save, what debt means, and all of our financial norms are going to be gone.
When, if ever, do you think the first central bank will start adding Bitcoin to the reserves, and will they exist in 20 years?
I think if they hold Bitcoin in reserves, they we had central banks essentially in the free banking era during a gold standard, but the notes were exchangeable to an explicit amount of gold. And I think it's very possible that we will see that now. I think rather than die, most will just change how they do business. So I don't see central bank money exactly disappearing, but I see it not being able to make policy choices because Bitcoin is the elephant in the room that slaps them in the face every time they do something stupid. So as far as when will they start buying Bitcoin or getting into that as a reserve asset, I think probably in the next run. In fact, it could be happening right now with some smaller institutions or smaller countries. But I think it's very possible that we hear about in 2 years that somebody was doing it 2 years ago, like today.
Right.
So not long. That's a short time scale for me, I think.
What is the biggest mistake you've made with Bitcoin?
Accidentally losing a key. Not having proper backups.
How do you feel?
Backup.
Yeah. What actually, if you can, what is your recommended or a sensible security setup in your opinion?
Use hardware wallets. No matter what, they're an easier way to keep yourself not exposed to having data freely available on the internet. Keep keys as far away from a internet connected computer as possible, but also remember that your biggest adversary is you.
Right.
It's not the police coming in and busting in your house and finding your private keys. It's not a thief hacking into your Trezor and taking it apart and connecting to the little chip and getting your PIN and stuff. That is not your number one concern. You are 99.9% more likely to lose a key, lose a hardware wallet. Just have good backups. Use hardware wallets for anything significant, and make sure you have an easy place to go. You have 2 geographic locations in which you keep your keys backed up. If it's your house, if one of them is your house, have an encrypted USB that you keep with your parents or something. Yeah. That kind of thing.
How do you feel about Satoshi Nakamoto, Bitcoin's creator, being anonymous and the coins that he likely controls or controlled?
Love it.
Okay.
Love it. I think it's one of the coolest things about Bitcoin.
What have you learned about yourself, or how have you changed, if at all, as a result of learning about and interacting with Bitcoin?
That is a good question. Maybe that I'm not as smart as I thought I was. I came to terms so many times. I was like, wow, I have no idea what I'm talking about. Like Bitcoin would just basically explain or reveal something else to me, and I'd be like, oh my God, I've been saying this utter nonsense for 2 years, and Bitcoin has put me in my place yet again. How I have no idea what I'm talking about. And every time I think I understand Bitcoin, it proves me wrong. So, yeah, just that I don't know what I'm talking about.
Bitcoin humbles everybody, man.
Yes, it does.
At what price would you permanently sell over 75% of the Bitcoin you hold, assuming there is no necessity to do so to cover expenses?
The system's not broken, never. Yeah.
Have you ever purchased other coins? If so, are you likely to do so again in the future?
Yes, I have. Nah.
What is your most controversial or contrarian view or opinion? If none on Bitcoin, any subject is fair game.
Probably just most controversial. As far as Bitcoin, is that normal transactions will not be how we interact with Bitcoin. That when this thing reaches mass adoption, it will have nothing to do with the default of what we think of as like sending a Bitcoin transaction. And that was more recent. But probably overall is that like I think government is a vulnerability of social organization. Like I think as a network, it is the attack vector with which we constantly destroy the ability to organize a society. And so I'm essentially a anarchist in the sense that I think regulation would be stricter and more fair without government. And most people cannot wrap their head. That's another like 10-year rabbit hole, and everybody thinks I'm crazy for that one. It takes me a long time to defend that.
Yeah. Ballpark estimate of Bitcoin's price in 5 years.
Gold parity, so like 330,000.
Do you believe
Ish.
there are any reliable ways at spotting a paradigm shift? If so, what are they?
I think the big key of spotting a paradigm shift is realizing that you're never going to see anything within the system that recognizes it. Like, so you have to step back from the status quo. Like, it's kind of the status quo can only survive if it does not recognize that the status quo may not survive. Like, as soon as the rules of the current system are brought into question, it's like, God, how do you explain that? The sovereign individual does a good job, and I'm failing at summarizing it. It's like when you're within the system, it's the architecture of like how we organize ourselves, what makes the most sense. When you're going through a giant paradigm shift, it is inevitable that within the current rules, within the current norms, that you can't see it because the current norms and the current rules are dependent on the fact that that is your Overton window, that that's your scope of reality. So you have to be able to put those sunglasses on and just look at the world from a completely different perspective, even if that perspective is wrong, just to see that things are changing from those norms and from those current rules. I hope that sort of explains it, but you just got to step back.
Yeah.
You got to step back.
I think you did, but also let's refer to the movie The Matrix for a further explanation of what you just described.
There you go. There you go.
Do you have a morning routine? If so, what is it?
I get up, go through my Notion. Notion.so is the thing, but it's like my to-do list, and like it's where I organize all my quick reads that are going to be the future quick reads, and like my tasks and to-do list. I've been trying to migrate everything over to that, and then write down. Like I just get up on my iPad and I just start a note and I just like write down everything like I'm trying to get done today. And then unfortunately I usually get lost in Twitter for a little while after that, and then I go sit down in front of the microphone with my coffee and breakfast and just go to town.
That's sick, man. How do you define success?
when you're producing value in the world that other people are compensating you for, and you're entirely in control of it. Like, it's yours. It's not borrowed from somebody else. That, like, I'm producing the value and in charge of selling it at a price. Like, it's fully independent to me. Like, it can't be taken away, essentially. Like, whereas a job, that's borrowed. If I've got, finances that's, somebody else is managing, that's borrowed. But if I own my own capital and I'm directing it and I'm producing value, which is income that people are seeking out that value and giving me capital, giving me funds for it, I think that's success if I'm sustainable and growing consistently.
Where or who is your go-to place to learn more about Bitcoin?
Twitter. Twitter is an amazing resource. People share all kinds of, this is where I get 90% of my articles. I still will go to specific authors and specific Medium pages and stuff looking for stuff, but there is no aggregator like crypto Twitter. And as long as you can kind of control yourself to ignore the outrage culture and not get stuck in some stupid, pointless debate for, 100 comment threads, you got to manage it a little bit, but yeah, it's a brilliant resource if you know how to navigate it.
Totally agree. Final question. What is the one or most important action that I or anybody listening can take today to up our game in any area of expertise of yours? So if I want to improve, what's the best way how to do that at this point in time? What could you tell me? What could you share with me that would allow me to improve?
Read. There's so much stuff, and I guess listen to the Cryptoconomy podcast if you can't read some of that stuff. There's so many great books, that particularly non-Bitcoin related books, that like, once you have like a foundation in like this perspective of how Bitcoin will change things, you can read just an ocean of other books that seemingly are unrelated and see how those principles or the idea of like social organization as a network, like I end up seeing so many things that we do day to day as protocols. We have all these social norms. These are protocols that have, like, and when people bend or break these protocols, they have certain consequences. Ideas that spread like protocols and networks. Like, we have all these networks that are just people who share common values with us. Language, negotiation, like there's so many things. Like there's just an ocean of great books. I've got a list of stuff on, I actually call it the Bitcoin Survivors book list on the website. It's thecryptoconomy.com. And it's like a list of like, I don't know, 20 or so books that I put together that I think are just major pieces of the puzzle of kind of seeing and kind of stuff. But it's really in books and reading. There's so much, the amount of content that is out there written down that is just will blow your mind and flip your whole world upside down is orders of magnitude more than in media, in video or audio. I'm trying to put a put a dent in that. I'm trying to move it into the audio space.
Oh man,
but slow going.
Yeah, you're doing a great job. Okay, so last section. This is the word association part. So I'll just say a word. The first thing that pops in your mind, you spit it out. Okay?
Okay.
Satoshi Nakamoto.
Bitcoin.
Government. Hash rate.
That's a wall.
The individual.
Sovereign.
Security.
Independence.
Ego.
Everybody's got one.
Greed.
Everybody's got it.
Stacking sats.
Awesome.
Fiat currency.
Crap.
Guns.
Necessary.
The cryptoconomy.
Awesome.
Altcoins.
Shit coins.
Pizza.
Delicious.
Socialism.
Destructive.
Trump.
An idiot.
Future.
Wonderful.
Libra.
Shitcoin.
Gold.
Physical Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin.
Digital gold.
Guy, we're done. That's it. That's all I got for you, man.
Love it. Love it.
Thank you so much for taking the time, man. This, after having been introduced to you only like 2 weeks ago, and then in prepping for this, listening to a lot of your stuff, I'm such an enormous fan now, and I still need to work my way through.
Awesome,
I
man.
need to work my
Appreciate
way through your all of the stuff that you've put out, and then try to keep up with all the stuff that you continue to put out. But I just think the quality of the content you're putting out is tremendous. I want you to, I know you're going to keep going, but I'm super excited for what lies ahead for you. So thank you for taking the time and speaking with me. I'd love it if we could jam again sometime in the future. I'm sure we'll have lots more to talk about then. Do you want to share any destinations or social media or anything like that?
Yeah, just follow at the Cryptoconomy on Twitter, and that's where I'll post everything on Twitter eventually after I've like publish episodes, and everything is basically under the Cryptoconomy, thecryptoconomy.com, and then the anchor page is anchor.fm/thecryptoconomy, but you can find it on Apple, Google Play, or anything. But there's a huge, like just like you said, there's a huge backlog of stuff. Like I've been. Like the whole purpose of the show was to just make it so people could, like, I know like so many people share out articles that they never have the time to read themselves. They're like, oh, this is great. Right. And I know because I did it for ages, where I was just making this backlog of like, oh, this would be fun to read. And, I'd get to read 2 paragraphs
Title
of it.
Sounds good. Like, yeah, I'll tweet it out.
Yeah, exactly. And so I hope I'm continuing to produce value and like making that available to people. And there's 300 of them, basically. It's a lot of stuff.
And just to clarify, there's the ones where you're narrating written pieces by other people, right? And then there's like just your takes, monologues by you, updates, sort of things, right? Is there any other types of content?
There's actually 3 different types. The crypto chat, and it's funny, I snagged the Cryptoconomy before. Like, it's really not about altcoins. Like, I have a couple of episodes about some stuff that's happening with altcoins, but it's really just Bitcoin, and the Cryptoconomy is the economy that is derived from that will be secured with cryptography and create the conditions for the sovereign individual. So that's what that means. But there are crypto chats where I do interviews. Like actually, if you don't mind, I would love to publish this audio as a crypto chat.
For sure, I'll send it to you when we're done.
Awesome. And then there's guys' takes, which are just like there's some topic that I want to expand on specifically, or some perspective that I want to hit on something. So I'll just do like a hour rant, based on like notes that I've been pulling together for weeks and weeks. And then there's quick reads, which is the main format. That's the only reason I can do it daily, is because everybody else is producing content like crazy, and so I just Audible all of those articles and add commentary. But those are the 3: interviews, my own takes, and then the quick reads.
And I can easily imagine a circumstance in the not too distant future, man, where more and more people being dragged into this, more and more people are feeling compelled to put their ideas down on paper, Medium or whatever, and publish this stuff. I mean, fucking send it over to Guy, and you'll have to determine whether it's something you want to put your voice behind ultimately. But I'm sure there's going to be lots of people that don't have the voice or the time or the setup to do it, but would love to have their work in that format as well. So send it over to you.
I love it when people send me stuff. Like, everybody seems like really reluctant when they do it. Like I just had Rodolfo Novak. We were chatting, and he was like, it's really great. I mean, he just apparently discovered the show like 2 days ago, and he was like, oh, this is great. I can't believe I missed out on this. So we were like kind of chatting in messages, and I was like, dude, seriously, if you find something that you're like, oh, this article is awesome, send it to me. It makes my job a lot easier. Like, I don't have to spend so much time hunting if people send me the stuff that they like or want to hear, because then I can skim it really quick and just be like, oh yeah, this is going to be gold, and I can just start recording. So yeah,
And
feel free, anybody
I
who
think
wants to read
people
something.
like authors in the Bitcoin space, like if they're gonna, I don't know how the whole publishing system works, but you're one of, hire one of your own, basically is what I'm saying. Like if you're gonna
Yeah,
do an
yeah,
Audible thing, then fuck, I can't think of a better voice, better person to do it. So keep it all within the
awesome.
family, as it were, and send it over to Guy. Um,
Absolutely. I'll be
Anyways,
here.
man, thank you very much again. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I'm sure I'll probably nag you at not even less than 6 months to have another chat, and you can update me on all the things that are going on in your world, and yeah, we can just enjoy the subject matter together. So thanks again, and I
Awesome.
wish you all the best.
Yeah, dude, thank you so much for having me on the show. This was wonderful. We'll definitely do it again.
All right, brother, take care of yourself.
You too, man.
See ya.